So, to be clear, what I personally think is Islamically incumbent is that you give, you donate at least, at least 1/5 of your income or what you own. 1/5 is, at least 20%, but over 20%, which is very steep. But I believe that's in fact what, at a minimum, Allah expects from you. I think this idea of 2.5% of the zakah, that is what goes to help the poor and to purify your money. But we've watered down the jihad obligation. If you are not going to engage in jihad personally, in other words, dedicate your body and yourself, then the way you engage in jihad is financially, and that's the jihadi share. Um, okay, so but then there's this, it's multifaceted. So there's the question of, well, who do we give it to, because there's a trust problem, and there is a trust problem. Well, in the modern age, the way, I don't believe that this is an excuse, because the venues are so numerous. If you can't trust a local center or Islamic center, or Islamic movement, then look nationally. If you can't trust it, find something that you trust nationally, then look internationally. Uh, if ultimately you can't, you really have a trust problem, then try to create something. Whether you go and you give the money to something like CARE, or you give the money to, or if you really want to be on the safe side, there's so many Muslim refugees in the world today, so many orphans and seriously destitute Muslims around the world. So I think this whole, this whole trust issue is a red herring, because if you really want to give, there are, there are organizations that try to help the Uyghurs. There are organizations that try to, um, that combat suicide among Muslim youth, the very high rates of suicides. I mean, so you could go and you give your money to a Muslim organization that focuses on the issue of suicide. You can spearhead a Muslim organizations that focuses on the issue of drug addiction, and which is a very serious problem among Muslims. I mean, we all pretend it doesn't exist, but all of us, either someone in our family, or we know someone that, or we know a family that had someone, that a Muslim that had a drug addiction or alcoholism. It's a pandemic among Muslims, and somehow we keep using this trust issue to do nothing. I mean, if if it if people are serious about wanting to fund um, work that would qualify under the law of jihad, they'll find it. You know, whether it's fighting addiction, fighting suicides, promoting education, helping refugees, helping orphans. Uh, you know, there are so many refugees that come to this country, and who helps them? Christian groups, churches. I mean, most of these refugees that come from Somalia and come from Yemen and come from Syria, they end up living with Christian families. That's the reality. And there isn't, you know, there are no Muslim civic organizations that help them. And so I think this whole idea, and I think the whole, thing about spiritual abuse and cults and so on. I think this is exactly like the discourse of the hypocrites in Surah Muhammad. The whining and complaining and um, coming up with obstacles why they have a problem. Well, I have an issue. I have a problem. Well, I don't. It's like I've told people here. I have very little patience with people that say, "Oh, there is I have a morale issue. I have an emotional issue. I have a psycho." Just do it. The solution is to serve. The solution is to get over yourself, get over your personal complaints, get over your emotional hangups, and find a productive course, a productive course of action. If everything fails, then just help the refugees in Palestine and in Yemen and in Syria. If you don't trust any Muslims in the United States whatsoever, and you don't trust that any any person to do a good job, uh, then there's so many Muslims suffering in the world that you can give them your money at a minimum. Um, so that's one that's there's of course a Muslim is under an obligation not to give their money to just anyone and to say, well, I've done my job. You have a duty to, it's the same thing in the matter of fatwa. You have an obligation. You don't have an obligation to become a sheikh, a mufti, a faqih yourself, but you have an obligation to satisfy yourself that the person that you are accepting a fatwa from, if you ask someone for a fatwa and you follow their fatwa, you have an obligation to satisfy yourself that they are qualified. So you can't follow the fatwa of someone if you don't believe they're qualified, or if you don't believe they have good moral character. Then it is actually haram to follow their fatwa. Similarly, when it comes to the matter of giving money, you absolutely have an obligation, because Allah will come and tell you, why did you waste your money on, building another mosque when there is this and this and that? So, in other words, you have to at least do your due diligence, exercise your best judgment, exercise your due diligence in saying, well, I will use my reason and my conscience and my prayers, because you should pray on it as well, to do the best I can. And as long as I've done my homework, you've discharged your obligation to do the best I can in knowing who I should give my money to. And of course, you know, this is part of Allah's sunnah, is that some people will research and pray and be inspired to give their money to help addicts. Other people will pray and be inspired to give their money to help build educational institutions. Someone else will pray and be inspired to help the orphans. A fourth person will pray and be inspired to help prevent suicides. Someone else will pray and be inspired to create Islamic institutions that help abused women. I mean, this is another thing. Creating organizations that come to the aid of Muslim women who suffer abuse without recourse, you know, it's obvious that we have a moral, legal obligation to do that. But then there's the other thing. Now, this is the side of the donor. The side of the donee. In the often given example, which comes from a long tradition of ethics in the ethics of ilm, that if you go into a town and the problem in this town, and you know that, let's say the problem in this town is that everyone drinks, and you start talking to people knowing that the actual existing social problem is that everyone drinks alcohol, and you start talking to them about how they should improve their wudu, then you've lied. Then you've actually committed a sin. The donee has an absolute ethical obligation not to tell people what makes them feel good or what entertains them, because their audience, and this is a matter of qualifications of who are the shuyukh. When a sheikh is not anchored in real Islamic ethics, they haven't been properly raised, properly indoctrinated, they don't feel that their real audience is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. My real audience, when I testify, when I do a halaqah, when I give a khutbah, is not the people sitting there, are not the people listening to me, it's Allah. And if I believe that Allah is going to say, why didn't you talk about X? It is absolutely haram for the donee, for the recipient, to carve their message to accommodate, to try, because this is, look at the entire trajectory of Surah Al-Baqarah, Surah Al-Imran, the ones we've at least studied so far, and yet more to come, inshallah. Anfal, Muhammad, Allah consistently comes and doesn't tell people what they would like to hear. Allah comes and says, this is not, I'm not interested in catering to your egos. There is a truth here. إحقاق الحق. And it is exactly that. If you're the people that go around claiming to speak for God are not anchored in إحقاق الحق, then we have a very serious problem. But إحقاق الحق means that you are extremely well anchored in the tradition, but also well anchored in modern, contemporaneous realities. because otherwise there will be a dissonance. There will be a cognitive dissonance where you can't match the tradition to the reality that people are experiencing, and then you betray Allah's message, because then Allah's message comes off sounding unreal, superficial, um, irrelevant, marginal. That's the fault of the communicator of the message. When we come and we basically make Islam that the Islam of the Prophet ﷺ was extremely relevant to everything Muslims experienced, lived and experienced in Mecca and Medina. That was the Islam of the Prophet. Then we come today and we have an Islam that is highly irrelevant to what people experience. We've got an enormous problem. An enormous problem. And it is an absolute betrayal to say, well, like what we see in real life, because people fail to fund you, so now you tweak your message and you are in bed with the Emiratis, and uh, you know you a few years ago, someone like Bin Bayya was, you know, this close with Salman al Oda, who, and suddenly, because of money and because of funding, he doesn't even mention his friend. He never talks about any of the people that are now in, or Qaradawi's daughter, for instance. Completely. And you think that this is Islamic, or this is somehow can possibly be justifiable? If Islam is not about standing by principle and ethic, then it ceases to be a message. Then we don't. Then there's nothing special about Islam.